The first president had a complicated history. The Verify team went to historical experts to break down his views and actions. Washington, question, what are George Washington's ties to slavery? Sources, Jessie MacLeod, Associate Curator at George Washington's Mount Vernon. Jessie J. Holland, author and Assistant Professor at George Washington UniversityMary Elliott, Curator of American Slavery at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and CultureANSWER. George Washington owned hundreds of enslaved people throughout his life. While his views on the institution of slavery shifted in his later years, he made private efforts to prevent his slaves from claiming their freedom and never spoke publicly about abolition until his death. Process, from ripped-down statues to renamed landmarks, communities are re-examining how to remember and honor historical figures. Even our nation's first president is under the microscope because of the fact he held slaves throughout his life. At the University of Washington in Seattle, students filed a petition last year to remove a statue of George Washington. In 2020, a D.C. task force recommended renaming nearly 50 D.C. sites. They include the Washington Monument in an early version of the report, though the site was later removed. In recent years, historians have more thoroughly studied ties between the Founding Fathers and slavery. That includes the team at George Washington's Mount Vernon, his historic Virginia home and plantation. Jessie MacLeod is an Associate Curator at Mount Vernon. He's held up as a hero in American history, MacLeod said of Washington. So his complicated relationship with slavery can be difficult for some people to understand. And it can make them uncomfortable. Washington, MacLeod explains, inherited his first enslaved people from his father at 11 years old. As a young man, he purchased more to work his land and expand his plantation. When he married Martha, she brought dozens of slaves from the estate of her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis. Early in his life, George Washington didn't really comment on the institution of slavery, MacLeod explains. He seems to have accepted it. She says that began to change during the Revolutionary War when writings show he started to question slavery, influenced by the anti-slavery ideas of his aides, Alexander Hamilton, John Laurens and the Marquis de Lafayette. In 1778, Washington wrote to his plantation manager, saying, "I wish to get quit of Negroes." He initially states his concerns about slavery in economic terms, according to MacLeod. But later, he added moral objections. Washington, she explains, for the most part, stopped buying or selling enslaved people, and took actions to avoid separating slave families.